Hey everyone, welcome back. Good to see you. We've got a special episode here. Kevin and I, we've been doing all this Road to Serfdom stuff and did some stuff for ThinkSpot. And ThinkSpot's been really cool to us. They hosted that live event, obviously, and they've been promoting our book review stuff. And they also offered to get us in contact with other content creators, people kind of in this space who are trying to make a difference in this crazy culture we're in. And the first one, they said, hey, send us your wish list. And honestly, the first one we sent was Benjamin Boyce. And it wasn't long after that Benjamin agreed, to speak with us without really knowing anything about us, which is pretty cool on his part. So we're going to keep the really weird questions to a minimum. So hopefully he doesn't regret.
Bold strategy, Cotton.
We'll see how it works out for him. So for those of you that don't know Benjamin Boyce, he kind of, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but kind of broke into this space because you were a student at Evergreen College whenever all of that very normal and very rational stuff happened there in 2017. You made this incredible documentary really about it, professional grade documentary that you put up on YouTube about the story of Evergreen. That's really well done. I think yours and Mike Nana's are just unparalleled. I mean, really, I don't know if anyone else covered it like that at all, but really good stuff. And since then, you've been kind of in this content space. You collaborate with a bunch of other people. Dude, you're all over the place. James Lindsay and Local Distance and Jody Shaw, and it goes on and on. So he has his own podcast. He has Conversations with the Voice of Reason. These really interesting kind of interviews that Benjamin does that start out with these adorable woodland critters at the beginning as he's introducing his guest. Benjamin Boyce, is there anything I missed there? Does that?
I think we'll be able to fill in any gaps as we go along, but that's okay. A fair intro. Thank you for that.
Yeah, of course. And again, thank you to ThinkSpot for setting this up. You guys are awesome for doing this. So anyway, there we have it. Kevin, you want to take it away with our first? Hopefully, this will also be a conversation. So, but tell us if we're getting out of that calm range. We want to keep everything, kind of.
We'll see.
We're gonna get rowdy. Yeah, man. So I've been going through more and more your material. I've been following you for a while, and again, we're totally gracious that you decided to come on. And there's the Evergreen story you came up with first. I'm not going to try to kind of stick just onto the Evergreen story. I think if anyone wants to know more about that, go to your YouTube channel and watch that series, because I'm going through it again right now, and it's brilliant. When you say like high quality grade, it's like Netflix, like that should be on Netflix. Like it was so well done. So just bravo to you for doing that. But I do think there's some questions that kind of come off the Evergreen stuff, and just kind of one as an intro question is, why did you choose Evergreen? I know Evergreen is a unique university because of the way, like I remember a little bit of what Brett said and a little bit of what you said, that they have an unorthodox, style grading system. They allow, these classes that have multiple professors from different disciplines to teach in that class. So it's unique compared to other colleges. So I'm just wondering, why did you choose to go to Evergreen?
Well, I went there because I was at a point in my life where I had been in what's called the workforce. It's kind of like Space Force, but much more mundane for a number of years, from like my 20s into my mid 30s. I got into my mid 30s and I'm like, what am I doing with my life? So I really wanted to concentrate on the intellectual side of things. And in America, we have this huge infrastructure erected for several decades now called higher education. And a lot of that's subsidized, especially on the state level. And Evergreen is a state college and heavily subsidized by the state. And also the federal government will subsidize your education, especially if you get these Pell Grant things, if you're old enough and poor enough. So it was available. I had the time. I wanted to disengage from mundanity and chart out the intellectual space. And so I looked at Evergreen. It was right up the road, and it was an opportunity for me to really pursue my passion, which had been literature up to that point. And so I arrived on campus, this 36-year-old guy, intent on trying to figure out what this literature thing was, and where it was at, where it was headed, where, you know, what the parameters of narrative are. And Evergreen also had a very strong emphasis on independent education, which I really liked. And that's why I avoided college, because I didn't want to jump through hoops. I wanted to be able to craft something and go deep. And Evergreen promoted itself as this really, this place to go really deep. Dig deep was the motto up until they changed it post-protest to your way to the world. But so I ended up going there.
Yeah. Did you have like a discipline that you expected to go into before you went there? Or did you just kind of go in there to kind of get the experience and try to figure out what you wanted to do?
So, well, okay, do you mean discipline like the market I wanted to go into, or the workforce?
Really major, I suppose. Would have been
okay,
best.
yeah, major, yeah. Well,
What'd you want to do with
definitely.
the literature stuff? Yeah.
Well, I had been attempting to write novels for 16, 20 years by then, and the novels that I kept on writing weren't possible to write. I was trying to write something that hadn't been written before, or I couldn't find good examples of it, so I had to experiment and experiment and experiment. And any true experiment has a high likelihood of failure, and from that failure you get to learn. That's what makes an experiment an experiment, is that you try something out, you fail, and then you revise what's happening. So Evergreen did an experiment on itself called social justice. They experimented with that. They had some very staggering results about that. But then after that experiment went the way it went in 2017, they have not done any work on actually examining what that experiment has to do, has to say about their starting assumptions. And that's what my work is to do, is to turn Evergreen's experiment into an actual legitimate experiment, to actually legitimize their work, instead of just letting them ignore what their ideas produced. But with regards to literature, I wanted to figure out what the heck I was trying to do. And so I went there with the intention of diving really deeply into the arts and the canon, and also the theoretical structure produced by the Academy and applied to literature. And there's all these different critical theories that the Academy had developed, because the Academy had used to be an institution of the church, and they had this long tradition of interpretation of the text of the church, or the Bible, so-called, called hermeneutics. And that process of making meaning out of a text is where you have all these different critical theories that we hear about now, and that we're reading about now, and that people are applying to life right now. But all the critical theories that we have now, including all the different kinds of postmodernism, they all kind of derive from hermeneutics. And so I went through and I wanted to understand all the theory, but also understand writing as a practice. So I set myself the writing prompt of producing a novel for every year that I was there. So I wrote a novel while I was doing my coursework, and the novels changed genres depending on what my course of study was to do. So my major was going to be narrative arts. That's what I thought of it as, something that has a theoretical component, but a practical component, or a praxis component, which is just actually creating literature, ingesting literature, and then thinking about literature. So that's kind of what I ended up doing and what I wanted to do.
So, well, it's funny you mentioned the experiment that Evergreen ran. I mean, the scientific method is racist now, so obviously they're not going to use that to evaluate how that experiment went. So would the you of now like make the same decision to go there? Like, in other words, like, you don't know everything that's going to happen, but the you now, are you similar to, like, is that still something that you're passionate about? How have you changed from that experience? Like, if the you today was in that position, like, hey, trying to figure out what I want to do, would you go there again?
Are we dialing back the world to 2013 too, or just me to 36?
Everything, the only thing different is that you're the you of right now. Everything, like your likes, interests, values, you're back in 2013.
Well, you know what? If I knew that YouTube was what it could be, I might have not needed to go to college. Maybe I could have done what I'm doing now without that. But because the Evergreen State College and the experiment that they ran gave me an audience, I don't know if I would have been able to build a YouTube channel without that kick. But I think I could be doing all the interviews that I'm doing now without the Evergreen education, because basically what I did at Evergreen was interrogate things, and that's what I do now. So but it was a grand adventure. I don't think I would not do that again. I think I did some very important work. I finished what I wanted to do with literature, or at least it finished me. So that was a nice way to kind of go into a next step and lay to rest that particular part of me that had an ambition to do that particular thing, which is to put words onto paper in such a way that it creates a big stack of crap.
Yep.
So I'm in a different space, but Evergreen had a lot of opportunities. The Evergreen that is in existence now is not as full of possibilities because of how they've been hit. So I don't know. But I probably could go there for cheap now. And they'd really want me around. And I, to be completely honest, being surrounded by a bunch of 19 and 20-year-olds is a mixed blessing when you're 36. So with hardly anybody else there, I still would have just basically been as much of a loner now as I would have been there back then.
Sure.
As it was back then.
Just a follow-up question that came to my mind. How have you, other than just like, so it sounds like what I'm hearing you say is that you had this passion for taking information or using like some kind of like hermeneutic to try and tease things out, and you wanted to apply that to storytelling, like writing novels, doing something unique there.
Yeah.
But then you said,
Yeah.
hey, I interrogated things, which you interrogate things, and then storytelling is kind of, you're interrogating it on paper. You're taking an idea, you're hitting it. I've heard, I think it was Jerry Seinfeld or Louis C.K. talked about, like with jokes, it's that same kind of way. Like you have a shampoo bottle and you put it on the table and you just smash it and from every angle you interrogate it until there's been all the funny out of it. And it sounds like that's kind of like what you were wanting to do with ideas and novels. And now you're just taking that same thing and doing it through video content. Do you feel like this is scratching that same itch? Is that kind of what you're saying?
It's the exact same method and the exact same modality of writing a novel is dedicating yourself to an idea or to a topic from 1 to 5 years, basically. And that's what I've been doing. I spent 4 years on the Evergreen investigation, and I've done a lot of other work in other topics that I've done just a lot on, just like really follow through on certain questions and then interrogate it from all these different points of view, just using people as the product rather than my imagination. I just have people come into my head and then I just poke them and prod them, and then they create the content for me, like little dancing monkeys.
Good. So you said something, so we don't, like Kevin said, we don't want to like relitigate and go back over the Evergreen thing, like specifically. People can investigate that. That ground is pretty well worn in a lot of ways that are kind of weird. Like people like us, that's the Bain quote, the uninitiated, but we are initiated, aren't we, Benjamin? Like people who know the story. And it's one of those things that, anyone who's going to be watching this probably does. But there is something you said there that I think probably plays into the broader cultural stuff that we're thinking about. So Kevin and I talk a lot about cultural trajectories and kind of where we're at, where we're going, like what's the logical conclusion to stuff. And you said the Evergreen of today doesn't have the same promise that it did when you originally went there, right? And so, there's this kind of thing that we've talked about and heard talk, this evergreening of America. What was the article? We all live on campus now. Heard Brett say the same kinds of things. So if we were going to take the idea of comparing the West, or let's do America, right? Because America is the center of everything and the center of the world, the most important place ever, right? Sarcasm. But and compare that to
I'd rather
Evergreen.
US than China, tell you the truth. So
That's true. That's Yeah, I mean, that's a whole nother can of worms. But so would you say that that same, for to take the model of Evergreen, what happened there and how it played out, and that story is still being written, right? Like they haven't learned, so they're going to keep doing what they're doing, in at least in some new way. And it seems like America and what's going on in our institutions right now is on a similar trajectory. So would you say that if you were to look at what Evergreen's doing right now and how it doesn't have the same promise it did even, less than a decade ago, would you apply that same lens, or at least as you conceptualize America or the West or the American experiment, the same way? Would you say what we're doing right now in terms of following that same kind of path, that with this ideology, want to call it wokeism or critical theory is part of it? I call it far left orthodoxy because it's a religion that has all of these different orthodoxical tenets. Would you say we don't have the same promise as we did even a short time ago?
Well, I mean, you get to the field of America, and the potentiality within America is much more vast than the potentiality of some small little crusty, crunchy, mossy liberal arts college in the woods. So the promise and the possibility of America is still wide open. If you're talking about like the entertainment industry, if you're talking about established sides of our society, such as the media, the established government, the established this, the established that, the possibility is being strangulated out of it because of a morality that can't handle risk. It's very risk adverse, and it's creating people that are also very risk adverse, otherwise known as snowflakes, people who are the American Booksellers Association just released a series of tweets apologizing for the violence that they enacted by sending out a list of recommended books that included Abigail Schreier's Irreversible Damage, which is a book that explores the consequences of transgender ideology, specifically as it is manifesting within young women, adolescent and pubescent girls, and just the lengths to which this ideology will take them mentally and physically. And that book just explores that, and does have a bias to say that mutilating healthy body parts is probably not a good idea if it can be avoided. And here are all the ideas, and it looks through all the ideas. But the American Booksellers Association just put out a tweet, I think it was yesterday, about how violent that was that they recommended that. So if those ideas in that tonality, and Abigail Schreier is a very, very intelligent, very fair woman, very smart and detail-oriented, and checked and rechecked all of her facts for that book. She is a conservative, right? So she does have a point of view on this, and she is a mother too. So she has a daughter, so she does have some stake in this for sure. But that somebody like that is being construed as a violent person, what does that do with the possibility inherent in any sort of fruitful dialogue about these issues with regards to these official organizations? Every single official organization, whether it's some sort of Ubuntu or Linux coding collective or whatever, anything that has a collective nature and has some sort of documents that say that this is a collective that is about this, that, or the other activity, from knitting clubs to book clubs, etc. They are all prone to being infected by what we call wokeness, or this sort of orthodoxy that has at its core a very risk-adverse, harm-mongering inclination to say that certain things are not just off the table or unacceptable, but they are actually actively violent and destructive and erase people's existence. So that kind of modality of thought, which is, I think, is actually evolutionarily adapted to infecting organizations, that stuff is everywhere. And wherever it is, it's sapping the potential out of the organization itself and then anybody who participates in that organization. In the very least, it causes drag insofar as everybody has to watch what they say for a very shallow reason, just on the basis of offense. And then also it gums up everybody in all these diversity, equity, and inclusion, interminably long training sessions or indoctrination sessions, which doesn't actually produce anything other than people navel gazing about these really big societal issues such as systemic racism or implicit bias, which are both like you're talking about God or you're talking about the soul in either one of those directions. So they have basically boxed in the entire world and all of society into a very unpromising, potential leaching kind of rubric. But you can always go outside there. Nobody's going to stop you from making a podcast until you get kicked off, So yeah, they're coming around. Cancel culture does exist, but you can still go off and do your own thing. So the potential of America as a whole, the potential of the West as a whole, is up to the people who want to be adventurers and be risk unadverse and go out there and try to make it on their own and do the experiment and fail a bunch of times until you figure out something that other people want.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, just a thought I just had was yes, the American, promise of adventure is still out there, but that kind of that eggshells thing you're talking about, that since so much of our institutions and society is infected with this. I had a piece that James put on New Discourses called "The Road to Hell is Paved with Eggshells," and I wrote about how everyone is in this environment, where they're walking on eggshells, similar to being in an emotionally abusive relationship. So the ability, my point is that the ability to follow through with that promise is increasingly gummed up, like you said, as to the degree in which you have to interface with certain institutions or certain credentialing mechanisms or whatever, or even just tech, as you alluded to, in order to pursue that promise. Like it's not so much the open road in front of you, but it's that minefield, kind of covered in these eggshells you have to avoid. But anyway, that's just an aside.
Yeah, if you want to rely on the infrastructure as it is given at this point, because the infrastructure's captured. So
yep.
Yeah. So I think to just dip our toe right back into the evergreen stuff for real quick, there's a kind of a thing you said at the end of one of the episodes that really, really caught me. And it was, these series of videos is not to condemn the individual. This is to be looked at as a sociological event. And I think that was something that was extremely important to put into your video, and a really good observation, because one of the takeaways we took away from F.A. Hayek's book, The Road to Serfdom, was him explicitly trying to say, Nazism did not come because they were German. It was not a German people thing. It was a series of anti-liberal events that led to an evil ideology to take its place. So why do you think it was so important to add that detail at the end to make people understand it's not at the individual level that this is becoming a problem? It's a sociological event. And how do you amplify that to the culture at large? Because that's something that I think we need to understand, because it's so difficult to say Trump is evil, just use him as an example. Trump is evil. And therefore you can, all the people who follow him or fans of him are, evil, instead of looking at an ideological level and say, is the ideology, corrupt, or, what else in the system is at play?
Well, if we start from the particular of evergreen, we can see how far we can go up to the general of the United States federal elections, but we can just start with evergreen. Specifically with the evergreen, it was that week and a half of footage that the students created featured students and some teachers acting and behaving in very particular ways. And their names are very evident and their behavior is very unique, or at least uniquely able to capture your attention and elicit a certain very passionate response. If you have any sort of claim to enjoying civility and the ability for people to reason their way through issues to get to some sort of understanding of each other, the Evergreen State College students in that moment flew in the face of that and did so much damage to anything called social justice. So much so that you could just write off all of their behavior as not having anything to do with the social justice ideology, right? That these were just a bunch of crazy college students. So you can use that crazy college student to either completely vilify the individual that acted that way, or to just detach what the young people were doing from the ideology. I think it's important to see to what extent did putting these ideas into the water and then enforcing them like they did, which is why there's so much footage, probably not as much footage, but almost a similar amount of footage of just professors and the administrators doing their own meetings as the students doing their own thing. So it was during that week of protest, it was a morality play. It was a drama. They were LARPing. And you can say there's a number of different people you can name, Shamarika, Jamil, and Naima. You just say, well, these people are just really just out there, and then a few more. They're just really out there. So we could go through and we can just judge them as assholes. You can just say, okay, these are assholes. This is a broken person. This person has narcissistic personality disorder. This guy's, you can do a bunch of armchair psychology on these people and stuff. So you can focus too much on them and then kind of miss the forest for the trees, which would be the forest is the arena for the agent that's acting this stuff out. So to what degree did the Evergreen State College put the conditions in place for that behavior to happen? To what degree did the administration allow that and then respond to it in such a way to make that, to substantiate those claims of this institution being incredibly racist and that the whole world is against these poor marginalized college students, probably the most privileged people on the face of the planet if you just take all of history into account. You know, these people are totally well cared for, but they're under constant assault. So there's just a different, and also to dispel criticism that I'm just as a filmmaker, I'm just making a cringe compilation, or I am overly judging these individuals and causing their lives to be kind of ruined because any employer stumbling upon this footage would not want to see it. So there's that. I'm just rambling at this point, but
Okay.
you look at the story.
Rambling, so that's important.
Okay. You
Very
look at the
on
story.
brand for us.
There's the characters. What do the characters represent? Can we see the characters as necessarily tied to their arena? To what degree did the institution create the conditions for this behavior? And to what degree does this ideology promote certain sorts of behavior, or promote certain sorts of power seeking, or promote to the top of the pack certain sorts of so-called leaders? Or does it reward certain sociopathic, narcissistic tendencies? I think it does, because once you start to look outside of Evergreen at the whatever happened in 2020 from June 25th to it hasn't stopped right now in Portland, but the entire, all those protests and stuff is very similar. And then all the adults in the room doing all their diversity, equity, and inclusion, sessions that they're all recorded on Zoom. You have that same sort of weird sanctimonious kind of worshiping at the idol of identity kind of stuff. And then whoever is able to have no shame eventually gets to capitalize on all that attention and start to openly manipulate everybody to shut up and to follow.
Oh, yeah, that was good. You answered everything. What was that, 5 minutes? Great job. Yeah, to stick on, I mean, I always think of stuff in terms of the latest material that I'm typically reading. And so F.A. Hayek's
What's that?
The Road to Serfdom is kind of, in my mind. But he had a good observation, actually an observation that I made before, that America's greatest export is culture. And it was really good to see someone way smarter than me kind of confirm that. But he said, you saw the breakdown in the West, but more so, in Britain where he was, that once they became an importer of culture, that's when they started to degrade. And to break this down to the higher ed level, I think that different universities, and I've been to a few universities, so I think they all have their different cultures. And I'm wondering, is it do you think that the higher ed university should be imprinting some of their culture onto their students, or allow their students to manipulate the culture within the university? Because I think, that and just in my opinion, allowing the students to just completely change the university, has that danger. And I think that's what you maybe would have seen in a place like Evergreen or a lot of these institutions. 1950 Harvard is not the same as 2020 Harvard. And there's good reasons for that. Obviously, there's some great changes there, but it still should maintain some sort of culture to imprint onto its students. And I think if it becomes an importer of ideas instead of an exporter of ideas, I think it starts to become corrupt.
Well, you're using the word culture. So is culture just a collection of behaviors? Is culture a collection of ritualized behaviors? Is culture a set of standards and expectations? Like, so what do you mean by culture? Within the academic sphere, if we say that the academic culture that is universal from someplace, ideally from Harvard to Evergreen, academic culture, ideally under my rubric, which is an outdated rubric, this is not the way it is anymore, would be based on meritocracy, by which I mean that you achieve mastery in some discipline. So by which you mean that the student submits themselves to mastering a discipline, which means that they submit themselves to a master of that discipline to learn in their shoes, and then come out the other side with some skills that they can go then give those skills into the world. Within like a little bit more detailed, muskier version of culture, like a Harvard education culture, I can kind of like see the fabric that they wear and the seersucker or the blazers or whatever they wear. They have like a different dress code, and then like some sort of weird mid-Atlantic kind of affected, pretentious, accent, whereas Evergreen is an affected, laid-back stoner accent, with a lot of tie-dye. Nobody's wearing any shoes. Everybody's on a first-name basis, and there's a lot of like kind of creeping venereal diseases in every corner.
Bathing optional.
Yeah, the bathing optional. The orgies aren't though.
Nice.
So there's that culture, and then to what degree will the students be shaped and shape either of those cultures? To what degree does Harvard and Evergreen select for certain students that can model that culture? But when you say who should be shaping academic culture, and should the collegiate culture be imprinting its culture on the students, which then go out and imprint it on the world, what we have right now is a corporatocracy within the university, which is incredibly adverse, which is there to serve the students as though they are consumers, and their reward for paying all this money is to get this degree that gives them this kind of this badge of honor that they go out and then it awards them entry into some sort of elite educational sphere. But it doesn't actually give them skills. It's no longer a skill-based or meritocracy-based system. It's just a reward, a very risk-adverse reward scenario where the corporation of the college, or the college as a corporation, needs to maximize profit and to meet the bottom line, and then to suck as much money out of the federal government by way of these student loans in order to expand all of its physical grounds to attract more donors to keep on expanding itself, and then padding the administration with more and more student services and less actual study services. So that's the trend of all colleges across the board. Yeah. So that's the culture that's happening now.
I would say they become sorting mechanisms as opposed to institutions of preparing people for the real world is really what all universities should be trying to achieve. But I think, when it comes to cultures within the other universities, they're kind of like a hierarchy of values, where, I'm trying to, think of a good example right now, but I mean, even this debate, or some people call academic freedom, kind of this ability to challenge each other as opposed to needing to follow a straight line of values. We talk, Hayek talks about like a planned economy where they have to build this hierarchy of values and everyone needs to follow the plan, but that type of plan does not allow this feedback into the system that allows people to deviate from the plan. Whereas a healthy institution, I would say, allows for that debate within the university to actually expose some good and bad ideas.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that well, with the concept of the Overton window firmly in mind, which means that there's a range of acceptable discourse. There's always going to be, you could always construe that there's a little bit of academic freedom wherever you go. You can narrow and narrow and narrow and say, well, there's still wiggle room, just like you can constantly be updating your culture to have less and less discrimination and always be crying about how discriminatory the culture is. You're going to be able to manipulate the data to give the result that you want. But if you look at what's happening or has happened with Peter Boghossian at Portland State University,
yep,
what he's shown, like the amount of persecution that this guy's gone through. He's a fucking atheist too, so he kind of deserves it at the hands of these atheistic religious monstrosities called humanities professors or the studies professors. The studies professors can't deal with any sort of negative reaction from his camp. They can fight amongst each other, and they can argue about who's more oppressed or who's more of an oppressor amongst each other. But they all know that Peter Boghossian and his whole liberalism, that can't go. Like we can't have an actual argument about that stuff. We have to deplatform him. So there is that strain going on, and anybody who's saying that college is a free speech zone is lying, because that particular what is applicably woke in college is explicitly illiberal in its effect on whatever department it comes into. And there's instituted ways to silence opposition. And there is a huge contingent within American higher education of professors who won't speak up, won't challenge this stuff because they know that their jobs are on the line, which makes them a bunch of fucking cowards, and they don't deserve their tenure anymore if they can't stand up for this shit. I have to kind of be firm on that, because they're the ones who are allowing these illiberal jerk-offs to control everything. That silent majority, they're already gelded. You know, they just they got blue balls of the tongue or something like that. And
yep. Well, so man, you just hit on like probably 10 different things that we've talked about in the past. Just as an aside, the way Kevin and I did a video, gosh, I want to say a year and a half ago, about the Overton window.
Titled the Overton window, yeah.
Well, it's the Overton asymmetry.
Yeah.
And so the way we describe it is that the Overton window, because I hear all these intellectuals or whatever you want to call someone like Ben Shapiro or something like that. I don't mean that negatively, but just like pundits talk about how the Overton window is shrank. And the point that we made is it hasn't shrank. It's actually become like a one-way, like at an interrogation room, like a one-way mirror, where one side actually has total freedom to say whatever they want, as long as it's in the criticism of the other side. And the other side can't say anything. So the Overton window hasn't shrank. It's actually gotten a lot bigger. So calling anyone a Nazi, like the pejoratives and things you can say that are like overtly racist, overtly sexist, overtly, if you want to talk about things that would actually incite violence, that has grown to where there aren't really any boundaries, except for like you can't say anything that doesn't push your ideas further. Like you said, they can fight amongst each other to push their ideas further to the left. That's how they can say they're open to criticism, but all of their criticisms radicalize them even further. But then there's this other side, like the Pete Boghossians and just the other cowards, people that want to keep their heads down, the very naive people, I would say, that think that this will just, pass by or something. Those are the ones who they can't say anything. So there's this Overton kind of asymmetry, both on campus and in culture. But one thing you said there that I had kind of a follow-up question on, about degrees and what they give and what universities are kind of meant to do, historically modeled after doing. I've been working on this piece about like how we have basically three major institutions in the United States that used to do a certain thing. It became ingrained in the American unconscious that they provided that thing, and now they're providing a different thing. And the collective frustration from those things, like not doing what we thought they were doing, is what's that's the expectation is the mother of all frustration, and the expectation gap is the father of all conflict. And higher ed is kind of the main one that I see as like the epicenter for all of this, in terms of, you mentioned the Pell Grants and student loans and stuff, and how we have more and more people, Kevin mentioned a sorting mechanism, and I think it was a sorting mechanism, and it still is, just in a different way. That sorting mechanism could be boiled down to credentialing, right? Like, it was understood that if you went to a college, you were taught a skill that made you competent in a field, that made you a valuable asset to a company, right? Or to yourself to go and explore that thing. So universities were a form of credentialing. I mean, that's the very first government Pell Grants, that whenever government got in the business of giving loans to people, was during the Cold War, where they're like, this is a different kind of war. We need scientists, we need teachers, we need translators, we need engineers. And so the first like government student loans that they subsidized were in those fields that are these load bearing occupations that we have to have. We have to have engineers, right? And so higher ed was this credentialing thing, but now it's become something else where, I mean, it's super complicated, but it's become something where it's still credentialing in some ways, but it's providing something different in other ways. And so students are they're taking all these loans. It's understood you have to go to college, right? Like, it's just, that was what I was told. I have to go to college, go there. This is the story. I mean, I heard this dozens of times while I was there, before I went. Take a few classes, get your gen eds out of the way, and you'll figure out what you want to do in the process. And so it's become this thing that's ingrained in us. We have to go to the university, and in order to get these degrees. But most of these degrees, like you said, if a department's been captured by this stuff, it's not actually teaching you the thing. It's this.
Unless the thing is to problematize every other thing.
Right. Exactly. So everything serves theory. So it corrupts at best. Like you said, it's a drag. So your brain isn't just learning math or chemical engineering or whatever. I mean, this is in everything now. It's in medicine, is one of the scariest places. But it's also got all this. You can't just think about, how do I diagnose this person's symptoms? I also have to think about, race, stuff and equity. And so at the very least, it is lowering the competence because of all the crap it's adding in terms of just what you're learning. But you also have these institutions that are giving people. So take Harvard. Kevin mentioned Harvard, for example. We used to say, and you can tell me if this is something that you would identify with. If someone used to say, so-and-so went to Harvard, that's all I needed to know if they were competent, if they were smart, if they were someone who is going to be a net positive in society. But now I want to know the degree. Did they go to Harvard and get some type of medical degree, or did they go to Harvard and become a gender studies, whatever thing, right? Because whichever one of those things is necessary for society, the other one is actively working to destroy it, right? And so we have this epicenter within higher ed where it's not doing what it used to do. It is kind of in some areas, that the college fix. I'm drawing a blank on her name again. Amanda something, maybe
Jennifer Kabaddi.
Jennifer. I was super close with the A names, right? Anyway, but whenever she was saying, I think one of the things she said in your interview was, well, what do you have? What can't you learn from YouTube? And sure, people brought up engineers and nurses, but most things you can. It's like, yeah, but we need engineers and nurses. Those are load-bearing things in society. A society's ability to produce competent professionals in these areas where we innovate, where we develop all of these technologies and systems, that's one of the determining factors of an advanced society. And so the higher ed problem is so multifaceted. It's creating activists, like you said. It's infected in all these departments. It's bogging things down, but it's also creating, the way I was thinking about it is, even if we won, sorry, now I'm kind of rambling, but hopefully I'll be able to put a fine point on this, is that even if we win, by win, I mean, get all this stuff out of corporations. Let's say we get out of K through 12, corporations say, okay, we're not going to hire these woke activists anymore. So let's say that happens. We still have this higher ed problem where it actually might get worse because it's going to continue to pump out radicals who are now even more pissed off at society. They're going to hate capitalism because for some reason people don't want to hire someone with a queer studies major, but they have $250,000 in debt and they're living in a city that the cost of living is 5 times the national average, and they can't pay their bills, and it's capitalism's fault. And so it's like those kaiju in that movie Pacific Rim, where every time they beat one. Have you seen that movie Pacific Rim? As a big monster, monsters and fighting dudes in robot suits. Every time they beat one, a bigger one comes back out of the void. And it seems like if we don't address the problem of higher ed, is my point. We don't address the problem of higher ed, whether it's the credentialing aspect, whether it's the student loan stuff, which the right doesn't want to address, whatever, we're not going to be able to long-term actually turn this thing around. So anyway, there's a lot there. I understand that. And I don't know if even how to
Didn't
ask a
they-
question there.
Didn't they send like some sort of hydrogen based neutrino bomb into the rift at the end?
So that's the thing. So they blew it up. And so, I mean,
so
the metaphor.
is that not, aren't you answering the question that you haven't asked yet?
So I have looked into, but that's one of those things you can't learn on YouTube, how to make those hydrogen based neutrino bombs. But there is something there. Like if you look at every, like, I think good metaphor for this thing, okay, this ideology, whether it's cult indoctrination, whether it's an abusive relationship, malware, like really good malware, you have to have an outside computer to identify it in the computer that's infected. Someone who's in a cult usually needs someone on the outside to help them escape. Someone who's in an abusive relationship usually needs someone on the outside to help them get out of that abusive relationship, and so on and so forth. And so, yeah, I don't think we can blow up the universities because of like that credentialing issue. Like I'm okay letting Portland fail as a city. I'm not okay letting all of the universities fail because, like I said, we need doctors and engineers and stuff. But so we can't blow it up. But how can we get something from the outside, because this thing has become so hermetically sealed? You know, I know that's kind of a lot that I just dumped in your lap there, but it seems to me that we have to figure out the higher ed thing long term. We have to figure it out because it's the epicenter.
What would Hayek do?
Write a book about it in 1944.
he would get in a time machine and go back and say, "I told you so." Or
yeah.
Well, I mean, isn't it like the free market? The final is Hayek. Isn't he like a free market kind of guy? It's like
He's kind of Chicago school.
Mises was his. Mises was his mentor. Him and Milton Friedman did a lot of stuff together in the 50s and 60s.
So, I mean, the damage is tremendous. The amount of, if you just taken the student loan debt that's going into propping up people who are getting these degrees that then go out into the workforce and they know more than anything else how to make life miserable for everybody around them. Okay, so there's the emotional drain, there's the financial drain, and then there's the drain on the economy, secondarily, financially or economically, because of the people that are being affected by this negatively. But eventually it's just going to, I don't know, like, how did we get into a place where we're thinking about such big things? I don't know how to even comprehend how terribly huge this problem is, other than laugh at it. When things get a little bit beyond my ability to, I'm not even a political thinker because I just can't think that abstractly. I can't even think in policy terms. I can think in terms of the individual, and so that's what I do. I interview individuals, and then I pair their expertise with their lived experience, so-called, and then you get a sense of this person's growth and development, and then you kind of understand that every individual has to go through the things that they go through, and every generation has to go through things they go through. So just like with the baby boomers and their 70s experimentations into cocaine, disco, and cults, you know, Christian born-again cults, or Hare Krishna cults, they're going to wake up and they're going to bring in another Ronald Reagan, right? We'll have a woke Ronald Reagan, or a woke response to the 60s that Ronald Reagan was, right?
Didn't we just have that, though?
Yeah, we kind of had that.
Didn't we just have that with Trump?
No. Trump was different. Trump was different. Trump is different. And this is the other side of the coin. So what we're talking about with regards to education is this bubble of irreality that is being propped up by the elite and by people that are seeking status. And those people are, to a greater or less extent, even the people on the right within that elite realm are predisposed to completely ignore the lower classes and the working classes. And Trump was more about saying, screw the entire system and just send in a swamp monster to just make everybody look as foolish as possible. And that's what he did. And just completely exposed our entire media apparatus as this ward of the state, basically, like that we're, and most people, a lot of people don't see that. A lot of people who are plugged into CNN don't see that what CNN is that. But I think that Trump wasn't the answer to, from the middle class, to this situation. That was the answer from the working class to
Hmm.
this situation. That's what I think. And that's why if you start to understand, if you stop being terrified or totally pissed off at Trump, you can just see him as a very wealthy, low-class individual. And playing into the lower classes with his taste, and then playing into the higher classes with his schemy business deals, right? So,
Yep. So, well, let me ask the question a different way. As what I just said assumes I even asked a question a second ago, which I'm not sure I did. But
what do we do about everything?
yeah, what's your answer to pain? So, well, I mean, there is an issue there. I mean, you brought up CNN because so to follow kind of your answer, or at least your response, you brought up like capitalism, the free market and stuff. And I don't think we have a free market, at least with ideas. We don't have a marketplace of ideas. We have a cartel of ideas. You know, a cartel is when a bunch of monopolies get together and work and just agree on how to fix the market. So we definitely have a cartel of ideas. Under normal circumstances, I would say information is the answer, right? So I kind of map this. I think about like the civil rights movement, right? So the civil rights movement, there was this really evil thing happening. Most people didn't know about it or were ambivalent to it, but then Sunlight got on it, right? And we had an honest enough news like media that was willing to cover all those things, and people saw, oh, this is horrible. We should probably do something about this. You know, honestly, I'm not even sure how many people who turned around on segregation really fully cared about it as much as it just made sense morally. Like, I don't think a majority of the population was emotionally invested, but the information was enough. But we don't have the information now. We have these gatekeepers, like Eric Weinstein calls it, the GIN, the gated institutional narrative, so that reality isn't allowed to play itself out. Like the free market works and experiments, things like the scientific method or whatever work when the inputs are reality, when the inputs are truth. But right now the inputs aren't truth. Like I said before, Twitter is terraforming reality. All of this stuff, people say reality bats last. It's like, right now, reality is not incentivized. There are huge portions of the country and huge swaths of like different social structures, arenas, workplace, whatever, where you're actually incentivized to lie. And not just incentivized to lie, but disincentivized to tell the truth. You're incentivized to nod your head and say, yeah, systemic, whatever thing. And you're disincentivized to tell the truth. And so we aren't going to have that free market answer as long as truth is not allowed to be an input into the equation. But that's a whole nother thing. But it's a big question. How about, I'll kick it back to you. How do you conceptualize it? Like whenever you think about the thing, so not just, I understand that we all could play our small part in what we can do, right? Like you said, hey, I interview people. This is what I do. You know, you're doing everything you can do, right? That's what Kevin and I do. We're just doing what we can do. But even within that, we still conceptualize like this big ass monster that has to be dealt with eventually. So like whenever you think about it, I'm not trying to say, hey, what's your deepest black pill? But just whenever you think about the things that are facing us, like how do you conceptualize this problem? Because my point is we can't even begin to address it unless we have some firm type of outline of the problem and know kind of where it's located. It's one thing to say, doctor, I don't feel well. It's another thing to say, I have this big red spot on my arm. You know, we have to have some type of conceptualization of it. Does that help at least put a little bit of fine point?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you have to do what it does and divide and conquer, right? So you kind of divide, you say, okay, well, there's this thing called illiberal leftish orthodoxy. If you're Eric Weinstein, you'd say it's ILO or something like that. You make an acronym and then you start.
He calls it Wokistan. He calls it Wokistan. I call it far left orthodoxy or flow.
Flow. There we go. That's it. Okay, so you got your flow, right? Which is this big sea change. How can you fight the sea? You know, Caligula whipped the Mediterranean when it swallowed one of his ships, right? You can go out and do that, but you're going to look kind of like an asshole if you do that. So you kind of break it down like, okay, well, what are the main topics? Well, like you said, there's the education system, there's the corporate system, then there's the media. Well, then what I say is like, okay, well, you make it smaller. You say instead of thinking federally, You think municipality wise. You look at what's happening in your immediate area. But if you want to be a podcaster, you have to universalize what you're talking about. I was lucky at Evergreen. Evergreen's universally recognizable because of how crazy it was. But if you walk into any given school board, you're going to see diminutive forms of every character at the Evergreen State College. You're going to see a George Bridges, you're going to see a Naima Lowe, and you'll probably see some stragglers come off the street vying to do a little piranha activity, such as some of the other student actors. If you're lucky, you'll have a Brett Weinstein, or you can step up to the bat and try to be yourself a Brett Weinstein. But basically, you can go in, you can plug into your school board, or you can plug into your just your town council or your mayor's office, and you just start seeing what they're doing, how they're implementing it. Or you work on the level of the state. And then you kind of pick out, well, what's the one thing that you think is most important? Education, or there's different topics within the different fields. Like there's the race issue, there's the sex issue, there's probably a third issue, but because, the third issue is probably class, and because this is a disease of the managerial elite and the people who want to be in there, they're going to ignore the class and they're going to downplay the class thing entirely. So you're not going to find that third issue apparent, but it's always kind of underneath the surface in it. So you just have to divide, well, what can I do the most impact on, or what can I do for the people who are caught in that and need resources? Or who are caught in that need to be woken up to what they're caught in, and you provide resources for people, and then you can make connections. But thinking of it as this flow, I don't think you can actually do anything other than thrash in the ocean, right? Or what's that one with Robert Redford? It's like a dredge or something like that.
All is Lost. Is that what you're talking about when he's out at sea?
All is Lost, yeah.
That's a great movie. Fantastic movie.
Yeah, it's a good movie, yeah. They made
The one with Darth Vader? I don't know. I haven't seen it.
They did not make a
Darth
sequel
Vader,
to that movie.
Does he ever
Life of
swim
Pi?
in any of the canon? Yeah, Life of Pi.
I don't know. I think that armor would really weigh him down.
Well, with that cape, I don't think he could get.
That'd be hard.
I'm not well acquainted with Battlestar Galactica lore, so I don't know.
Can a Wookiee swim? I don't know. Yeah, so I think we're up at an hour now, and I think going on a bit of a easier part of the conversation. I just want to ask you, what is love? I'm just kidding. Oh. No, one of those impossible things to ask. But I think one of your really, really amazing talents, and I love the fact that you got to talk a lot about your ideas, in this conversation. But you're an amazing interviewer, and you're able to pull stuff out of people without injecting your thoughts onto every single thing that they're about to say. I think a lot of interviewers don't do that very well. They don't allow the people to talk and say their own words instead of, giving them a pointed question and trying to get them to answer the question that they want to. And
is that a criticism, Kevin?
Since it's not a criticism.
For 20 minutes.
Not a criticism.
No, I know.
Yeah, you are an awful interviewer.
Yeah, I know.
But like, what gets you interested in interviewing? Because you've done a series of interviews on transgenderism. Obviously, you've done more of the woke stuff. What is your interview style? How do you go about scheduling an interview? Do you kind of pick a topic, or is it more of all right, this person's available, I think they're interesting, let's set something up? What's your strategy there?
Well, so I mean, if you want to talk about wokeness, I have a series of conversations on wokeness, or whatever you want to call it, flow, whatever. There's always these different terms, and whatever term that we're going to use is going to be problematic in one way or another. But there's different ways to do that. You can talk to an economicist, you can talk to somebody who theorizes about social media, you can talk to somebody who's a sociologist, and there's different people with different sorts of skill sets that can think about things on that level. One of the things that I saw at the Evergreen State College was that you had a bunch of very small thinkers trying to think very big. You had a bunch of people who hadn't figured out how to be a self yet, thinking systemically. and especially the students, but also the professors. Well, the professors they were trained in thinking systemically, but then they tried to turn their classrooms into some sort of psychology experiment or some sort of group therapy session. And then it have interpersonal skills to actually like figure out, we're going to summon all this trauma. What do we do with the trauma? I don't know, but we summoned it. And that's what we have to do. Just like leech the wound or something like that. So there's different ways of approaching every different given topic. So if you want to talk about something like you just slice off a pie, I was like, okay, campus culture. That's where I started. Evergreen State College. And then I'm like, well, what's happening over here at this Laurier University up in, where was that? Outside of Toronto in Canada with Lindsay Shepherd and Wilfrid Laurier. And they had a whole dust up that was very similar to the Evergreen State College. You had these professors that were very aggressively authoritarian. And then you had these wacko activists who were standing on behalf of the rights of this entire group of people and acting like total asshats, but they're righteous asshats, which is the worst kind of asshat because it's like a halo made out of poop, you know? And it's like instead of rays of light, there's just like streaming flies and poop lines.
We're going to name this video Halo of Poop. Perfect.
The Halo of Poop. Yeah, this sounds like we're kind of making some sort of death metal album now. Okay, so I went from campus culture, and like I went from race relations, which in America is just like, well, it's never going to end. The race thing's never going to end in America. It's too a part of our identity to fighting about it, right?
Yeah.
There's too much money wrapped up into it.
Well, the race problem in America is the class problem of Europe. You know, that's why I would say not to get into the post-Marxism ideas, but you know, Marxism focused on on class in Europe, where class is not really a large division, I would say, in America, but race was toward the at the beginning of America. So that's why it manifests itself here in America this way, as opposed to classes fighting. I mean, Bernie Sanders tries to do the class thing, but that dies out pretty fast. So
he gets captured by people who are identitarians anyways, because they have more cachet in that.
That was the Laclau and Moof wrote about that in that Marxist journal about how it was that early 80s. Douglas Murray writes about it in The Madness of Crowds, about how they said that because the middle class people were being raised out of poverty by capitalism. And so they said, we have to expand this out if we're going to see the revolution. So we need the race. Yeah. So, I mean, like my point is, you're right. Is a certain group of people that will always need to keep this thing alive. Otherwise they're not going to get their stupid ass revolution.
It's also, it's not even just, I guess revolution is a part of the American spirit too. We're always saying, screw the man. We're founded on screwing the man. So when a bunch of Americans say, screw the man, and they're talking about America, it's just a part of our blood. Like our founding document was saying, screw you, daddy. Yep. And giving daddy the war. Finger. Yeah, it's a declaration of war. So we're always going to be in that. And then the race thing, it's a terrible, it's really tense. So like you talk about the race thing and you're like, well, there's too much entrenched motivating thinking and all this stuff that's never going to end. So what's something smaller that I can deal with? Okay, let's deal with sex. That's much smaller than race, which you think it would be because it's like much easier to think about, but like the same sort of corrosive postmodern ideology is now saying that there's no such thing as biological sex, right? There's that whole nest of ideas that's ostensibly about this thing called the transgender person or the trans person is just another influential arm of this kind of weird cloud of ideology. I don't know what it actually is. I keep on calling it woke because I don't know what else to call it. But so you pick up a topic like that, like, okay, well, let's start talking about this one little tiny thing called transgenderism, right? So I'm going to interview transgender people, and then I'm going to interview people who detransition. Then I'm going to interview. Somehow I started interviewing all the top researchers in the field. And then you have a bunch of other things that you're watching. You're like, oh, well, there's this whole thing called feminism, which I thought was a terrible thing. But it turns out that there's a lot of nuance in feminist thought, because I was, kind of this anti-feminist kind of Gamergate kind of guy, and love women, but people who represent women. I mean, it's just the same thing over and over again. It's like, here's a bunch of people that are claiming to represent the entire group. And then because they represent the entire group, they can act however they want. And then just solely the name of the group that they're standing for. But you get into that, you're like, okay, well, what is this feminism thing? Actually, there's all these different kinds of feminism, and they're always fighting against each other too. And so you're kind of in a smaller area, but you can still see that there's individuals who are coming into and out of all these ideologies, right? Everybody's like on this, like some people get stuck in an ideology and they become a true believer, or they build so much of a personality that they kind of manifest the ideology. But for the most part, people kind of go through a transit, and they kind of either go slow or fast. And I like to find people who have kind of gone into a personhood, and then that personhood breaks for them, and then they have to reinvent themselves. Like, that's kind of my American dream, is the person who, basically it's some sort of novelistic archetype of a person going on a quest, thinking that they know what they want, and then they get what they want, and then they're destroyed somehow, and then they understand that they are actually a part of something much greater, and using all of the, instead of focusing on all the wokeness or all the other things, you focus on what it's doing to the individual. And then you just talk to the individual, and you let the individual just talk through it all. And that, like, the Jung quote, people don't have ideas, ideas have people. You can invert that if you listen to people and you allow them to kind of overstand their ideas by putting it in the context of how that influences them and how that allows them to influence others.
Good. So, final question. That does help, by the way. I mean, really, it sounds just like your interview style is you have a certain type of people you like to talk to, but largely it seems like you kind of just follow what interests you, which is probably the right way to do it, right? You're going to ask
it makes it
questions.
Easier to pay attention when you're interested in the topic.
Sure.
In terms of paying attention, I've never seen you turn around and play on your phone yet. So I hope
people accuse me of that, but it's because I'm writing notes. They think I'm like playing some sort of like Candy Crush video game. I'm like, no, I'm writing what they just said because I'm going to forget it.
Yep. Yeah. So, but I think that's right. There's a reason we didn't ask you to talk about like My Little Pony or something like that. Well, because
I don't know anything about My
Little
Pony.
If you want to do a follow-up interview, yeah, that'll be the next topic. But
right.
Are you guys bronies? Is that bronies? That's
I had a roommate that was a brony unironically. He was moving in as another roommate was moving out right before I got married. And he had all of this, like these posters and stuff. He was a great guy, super nice guy. And I said, you are not, that's going to stay in your room. Like I'm engaged. This other guy lives with us, is single. We want to not scare off any girl that he, might want to be interested in. But what was funny is the day I was moving out, or right after I moved out, I came back because I had forgotten like some pots and pans or something. And the whole living room had turned into like this command center with like all their computers and stuff. It was just, I was like, oh, so this place is this is where you're bringing all the girls back, it's just brony stuff everywhere. I mean, he had the plushies, but I mean, at least he respected that. I mean, he knew I probably would have thrown them
boundaries
out the window or something if when I was living there. But anyway, so to kind of circle back, Jen Psaki style, whatever her name is, to what you originally talked about as wanting to pursue being a novelist, and you just kind of referenced the journey, your adventure, like your American adventure, your kind of story mirrors the kind of people you like to talk to. Where do you think we are on our hero's journey, like as a country, as a culture, just in the West, like in the hero's journey, like
what decade were you guys born in?
90s.
He was born in the 90s. Yeah. I'm older than Kevin. I'll put it that way. I'm younger.
80s,
90s.
So you guys are millennials.
Sure. I'm born in 87, but my parents are super duper old. So I paint houses. I just painted a house for a woman who's 86, and we would talk for hours while I was painting. Cause I was like, I can talk to you more easily than I can my brother who's 9 years younger than me. Which is a whole different thing. But anyway,
well,
what do you ask?
You guys, I have to break that question down to like, where's Gen X? Like, because I'm Gen X, I'm like kind of like on the young side
Sure.
of the Gen X, and I've been following like my interest and the conversations that I want to do. And there's conversations that are more informative. There's conversations that are more like interviews, and then there's conversations that are more like conversations that start to edge into a form of art that I think is not unfamiliar to anybody, but kind of unfamiliar in the podcast space because it it loosens from the boundaries of the parameters of expectation and starts to kind of start to formulate things. And the people that I end up being able to groove with on that level, kind of like taking conversation into like a jazz territory where it's more like improv. And then we talk about topics and then we go into other ones and we bring them up. But the people that I groove with most are people about my age or people basically Gen X. And I can kind of see us on our hero's journey. And so I don't think that there's an us. I mean, there's all these different groups and subgroups and stuff, but I think the generational marker is something that kind of, it sticks to me and it sticks to people like me, this Gen X thing. So I see us in a position of having slacked off or followed our dreams or just kind of just went into the res or off the res. We just did our own thing. Maybe we had some kids, so we got a job and stuff. And now all of a sudden, we missed out on the 60s. So that was kind of looming over our youth. Our parents had this huge 60s moment and it was so important and it defined America for their entire generation. And we didn't have that. We had, Pearl Jam and Nirvana and PC culture, and weed was not like a crime against humanity. Things were kind of, and then we have Clinton, the blowjob president kind of thing. So we're kind of tongue in cheek and kind of apathetic. And now with the way that things have been ramping up since 2013 onward with this entire thing that we're talking about, a lot of us are waking up to the fact that we do have values that we haven't really stood by, or we have values that are public values, are civic values, and we have kind of neglected our place as, I guess we're getting to a point where it's our turn to be the man. And we don't know how to do that because our parents said, screw the man, but they didn't teach us how to necessarily be adults, or we ran away from being adults. And now we're kind of in this weird kind of midlife. We're suddenly waking up to the responsibility of somehow giving wisdom, finding the wisdom to give to people, finding the tools to give to other people, finding the perspective that we've gained by our own unique circumstances in our own unique point of history. So I'm really interested in exploring the rise of Gen X and the sunset of the boomers, and then seeing how the Gen X can actually facilitate some sort of passing of the torch of the best parts of America, and then an unironic adoration, or at least just a bit of reverence toward our nation and toward what we can give the world that isn't mired in this infinite journey of progress that has increasingly diminishing returns and more encroachment upon freedom. The freedoms that we enjoyed of just being able to pop off our mouths and not get canceled, right? Which we don't have anymore. We had that because we didn't have the internet, and we have the internet now. So that's kind of what I'm interested in looking at and exploring.
Is that what victory looks like? What you just said?
Is that what victory smells like?
It smells like Teen Spirit. Or is that what victory looks like? Like what you just said, like passing that torch in a way that's not mired down by this.
Well, okay, yeah. So if we want to, yeah, okay. So you start to talk. I've had a lot of conversations with immigrants or people who are children of immigrants, and one thing that they give perspective on that is lacking in this generation of people who are rising up and overthrowing and dismantling is this complete absence of gratitude for what we have. So we have to kind of rediscover gratitude. And then once you have gratitude, then you start to have reverence. If reverence is based on gratitude rather than obligation, it actually is more American, or it's more alive and more spirited. And so that would be how I want to make everything. You have to make everything sexy. You have to make everything inspirational somehow. And so if you go the gratitude route, that glimmer of reverence and respect and honor of what we have to give the world and what we have inherited will come about as an effect of the gratitude rather than as, an expectation of obligation.
I like that.
Dude.
Yeah, we're running up on time, so
Okay. Thank you.
won't ask you what defeat looks like, since we don't want to end on a low note, unless you wanted to answer that question.
Do you guys think, you guys see, are you optimistic? Are you guys floundering? You guys think that'll be okay? You think that it'll just be a bunch of compounds with a bunch of people that are well armed guarding themselves against the writhing masses of zombie wokesters?
Well, as a card-carrying member of the conservatives, of course I have my guns ready to shoot all the pinkies. But I do think that's actually a problem with the more conservative types, is they believe that's still a reality, that you can sit inside of your bunker with your guns, and they don't realize that if anything in that bunker is connected to the internet, that ideology is already in your home, no matter what. You can't defend yourself with a gun. In that respect, but I think I'm sometimes a bit more optimistic than Truman. I'd say I still have faith that we can bounce back, and as long as we kind of rely, on that founding principle, the founding ideal that is like true liberalism. And we talk about again with Hayek the difference between the American form of liberalism and the European form of liberalism, which is liberalism in its 19th century European respect is pushing against government coercion in almost every aspect of social and even economic life. Whereas the version in America that was adopted, and he explicitly says, like, I don't know why the liberals allowed this to happen, but it's almost exact opposite, where it's like, we want government intrusion in just about everything. So I think if we get back to the roots of the true liberalism, that, will be our natural defense against it. So I'm a bit more optimistic. I know, Truman brings up the black pill, and that's something I try to avoid if I can.
I'll say I'm optimistic kind of about certain things. So the things I'm not optimistic about are, like, we live in a country that has shared governance. That's what a republic is. We're a representative democracy. We're supposed to have everyone's supposed to have the say, or at least represent people that, or elect people to represent their viewpoints. And I'm not optimistic for our ability to engage in any type of shared governance on even just like a basic level in the future, because like example I always give people just as a thought experiment. Okay, so do you prefer Benjamin or Ben or Benji?
Yeah, Benjamin. Thank you.
Jimothy? Yeah. Okay. So Benjamin. Yeah. So you live in Oregon, right?
Washington, which is
Washington.
basically the same thing. Yeah.
What's funny is that people in the middle of the country are kind of as ignorant about the coasts as the coasts are. I don't think we're as ignorant, but I think we're 80% as ignorant. Anyway, so you live in Washington. I live in Wyoming. And I just use the thought experiment of take a kid, who's maybe 10 now, 12 right now. And so they kind of, or maybe even a little older, you could say 15, 16, just anywhere in there. I mean, man, just pick an age that works for you. And fast forward 10 years and say a kid that grew up in like rural Nebraska or Missouri or Iowa or something like that, or Wyoming where I live, and then put them in a room with a kid who, is 20, 25, even 30, or so now you're looking at an adult 10 years from now, and just tell them to have a conversation about reality. Someone that grew up in Portland versus someone that grew up in rural Wyoming. And just, we used to point out that there were differences in regions, and it was kind of a novelty thing, right? Like in Texas, they call every soda Coke, even if it's a Dr. Pepper, or people have different accents or they eat differently, or, that was the bits that people would do in comedy, say, oh, you ain't from around here, are you? And so it's kind of a novel thing, but at least we had a shared understanding of reality and like how the world works and events. I'm just not optimistic that if you fast forward, I don't think you could do it now, but so I just think even 5 to 10 years from now, if you put people in a room in these areas, especially people that are growing up right now, and try to have them engage in a conversation about just the state of reality, I don't think it's going to be possible because they're going to have different definitions of words. They're going to be operating under a different underlying set of presuppositions and facts. Take everything from racism to January 6th to election. I mean, just pick anything. There's not a topic that they're going to be able to even, it's not about agreeing on opinions. It's about agreeing on what's real and what's not, and what's true and what isn't. And so I'm not optimistic about that. I'm optimistic about some things. Like, I think that people are going to be homeschooling their kids more, and there's going to be some cons to that. But I think we're going to have basically the things I'm optimistic about are the pockets of society where I think in the future, not that we're already kind of there now, but people who have been migrating along ideological lines for a long time. People are moving from these big blue strongholds. I call it. Have you ever seen the movie Annihilation or read the book? Natalie Portman.
Oh yeah.
So there's this thing called the shimmer, right? And it's this.
Mhm.
It's got these clearly defined boundaries, and when you go in there, it distorts reality. So I say the metropolitan areas are basically the shimmer. And they're growing. And when you're in the shimmer, you might know something's up, but reality's being altered around you. You can't really pick up on it. And so I think we're basically, and the shimmer's spreading. That's why Omaha is governed the same way as San Francisco in a lot of ways. Kansas City had an autonomous zone last fall, right? And so the shimmer spreading, I think we're increasingly going to be that which is a metropolitan area shimmer and that which isn't. I think there's going to be cities that don't exist yet. They're going to crop up out of these smaller communities that people are moving to because they just want to be around sane people. This thing has infected every aspect of life. You can't watch a TV show without having some crazy bullshit being shoved down your throat. I turned on my Xbox the other night and it said, there was a thing that says, heroes get vaccinated. Find out about your local, vaccination centers and stuff. And so I think I'm optimistic in the long term for like the cities that are going to crop up that don't exist yet, for the places that are going to create competing institutions. I think we are going to have competing credentialing mechanisms like in higher ed. But I'm not optimistic for us existing as a country in some type of presumed shared governance as the way things are because of how like the online space is terraforming reality and all of these people are basically, like you said, cosplaying, as avatars in this like online ideological war. And as people don't live next to each other, it's easier to caricature the other side. It's easier to be more indifferent, assume that they're operating in bad faith. So I'm not optimistic for the country. I'm optimistic for the people that are, that live stream Kevin and I did on ThinkSpot was called Siege or Separate, and the question was kind of going off of Rob Dreher's The Benedict option, like, do you stack sandbags or do you build an ark? And, in a lot of ways you do both. I'm optimistic for the people that are building arcs right now in a meaningful way. But if you're to take a macro view of our country as a whole, which really is the last bastion of freedom, even though it's not necessarily like what it used to be. But the people don't understand how unique this is. And as we move farther and farther away from an understanding of history, it's going to be easier for people to want to abandon all this stuff. So I'm not optimistic for the country. I am optimistic for some of those arcs. I know that's kind of a long answer, but it's kind of a mixture of both. What about you, man?
Yeah. Me?
Yeah.
Oh. The worst parts of what we're critiquing aren't stable enough to persist. And I think people are going to get restless and tired artistically, aesthetically. They're going to get hungry for something saucier or more interesting. I think that the ways that the Democratic-run cities coddled their Antifa, we're allowing those people to act that way to get Trump out, and Trump's gone, so they're not going to put up with that much longer. You can already see the police state coming after all those people. That's what they wanted. So, so I think that our true enemy is yet to reveal itself. I don't know why I said that. I know it's a reference to something, but I think we don't know it. I think that there's something else. I think there's going to be an involution and an evolution of this stuff that we're critiquing. So it's important for me to just stay connected to human-sized problems, which would be individuals. Again, Evergreen was people, individuals who didn't have the capacity to be individuals yet, tilting at things that are superhuman in size, like the history of racism or whatever they were actually aiming at. And that caused them to inflate their egos to such an extent that they acted terribly because they had no sense of remorse or no editing function for their behavior. So they lost all sense of proportionality. And I think that reality has a way of not intruding into us so much like a slap in the face. If it doesn't hit us in the face or we don't fall on our face, there's other ways where we just kind of we start to want to be connected to something a little bit more stable. And a lot of the stuff that is outsized right now as problems in the woke space will kind of deflate and turn into something else. And I don't know if it'll be a bigger problem. I don't know though. I mean, maybe if America's to survive, maybe we have to kind of reassess what we're doing and reorganize. There's that one, Idaho's trying to make like a super territory. Like right where there's like northern Nevada, northern California, southern Oregon, or something like that. Then Idaho, greater Idaho, or something like that. That would be kind of cool if that stuff started happening, but we'll see. Because the elite force that the invisible government, the shadow government, that huge federal bureaucratic infrastructure, that is the real enemy, and it's just hiding behind wokeness. That's the real enemy of liberty and freedom. And it's using all this social justice stuff to its advantage, and it can't help but do that. And I don't know how we're going to deal with that problem, because there's no way that you're going to get away from that, making little communes or even big cities, because that thing is just too powerful. And who controls it? We don't even know who controls it.
We have no idea.
There's no checks and balances. It hides itself from our elected representatives. They're on a need-to-know basis. This information state. It's like that stuff is insanely messed up.
Have you read The Creature from Jekyll Island about how the Fed was created?
No.
It will. It honestly, it sounds so crazy. What went into. I'm serious. It's. All of this is stuff that at the time was so clandestine and just super shady, but it's all, once they got it done, it was done. And so it's all public information now. But you mentioned the bureaucratic state. If you want to look at how the Federal Reserve was created and how the banks, like the people who basically were for it, had to act like they were against it so that they could rally public support in favor of it. And they met on an island. It's called Jekyll Island. That's where the book comes from, is where these people who represented over half the wealth in the world got together to come up with this idea of the Fed. Dude, it really is crazy. I'm serious. Like it'll absolutely blow your mind of what went into it. Just that one thing, the Federal Reserve. So yeah.
The Creature from Jekyll Island. Okay. I'll check that out.
Because that was
fascinating.
Yeah, dude, there's so many other, I've got so many other questions and follow-ups, but yeah, Kevin, I'm just gonna let you take this, because
this is something that kind of came up during our Think Spot live stream. Someone commented and brought in the fact that the left, there's this right, there's this Republican, there's this Democrat, there's this public fight that they have, and then there's the behind the closed doors that they just kind of agree on everything and just move the bureaucracy forward, and so that's kind of scary. And you mentioned that there's this enemy that has yet to reveal itself. I think we all kind of know what that enemy is going to look like, and I believe it's the bronies.
It has to be.
Once you give them an inch of public wall space, it entirely becomes a shrine to their god.
You'll never
gods. It's a pantheon, right?
It is.
Right.
But on that, man, thanks for coming on. This was a fantastic conversation.
Thank you.
We got to see. Yeah, we got to see you do a ton of interviews, and it's really nice to kind of get to know you, and you have a ton of depth into how you think about these things and how you play with these things. There's a certain aspect that I think people like Jordan Peterson's a good example of someone who has this, that you can see the gears turning, you can see them think in real time, and that makes them super authentic. And that's why, other than his brilliant insights, that is why people gravitate to him so much. And I think you kind of showed a lot of that today, that you actually play with these ideas. You don't just have a prepared response. So it's really refreshing to actually get to interview someone like you and be able to play with this stuff, even though some of these questions are really wide in scope and some of them are, super narrow. So we try the best we can. But yeah, so for people who are watching this, listening to this, and are a fan of Truman and my material, but you haven't heard of Benjamin Boyce yet, which I imagine is just about no one, make sure to follow him on YouTube at Benjamin A. Boyce. I think you're on Twitter at Benjamin A. Boyce, and ThinkSpot, obviously, Benjamin A. Boyce. Again, ThinkSpot, thank you for helping set this up. But anywhere else that
Super
people
cool.
can find you?
LinkedIn?
Those are my no.
MySpace?
No.
You guys got MySpace?
Yeah, I haven't logged into that. There's some compromising photos I need to get back on and delete, but they're out there.
I already hacked
No,
it,
no,
man. Too
I
late.
have a if anybody's interested in my impossible fictions, they're at alias2dream.substack.com. That's ALI alias and then TO dream.
Okay.
If you guys want to check that out.
That's
Yeah, we'll
awesome,
put
man.
links in the description for all of that. Yeah, this is awesome. We'll stop recording now, but that was great. Be sure to follow, again, Kevin and I, but
If you have
check out
time.
Benjamin if you haven't. Yeah, if you have time. Get through all of Benjamin's stuff first.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.